Hello, Nisambula Vinaka, Noaya, Kam Namori, Kia ora. Hello, Olgeta, Namaste, Namaskaram, Assalamu alaikum. Greetings to you all from the beautiful islands of the South Pacific region. Thank you for your patience. My name is Farzana, and on behalf of the organizing committee, I would like to welcome you to the International Conference on Old and New Indenture, Labor Practices and Human Rights. This conference is significant as it brings together leading scholars from around the globe to address historical and contemporary labor practices. As you would have seen from the program, we have almost 100 presentations over the 3 days, and our presenters come from across the Girmit diasporas, including Guyana, Mauritius, Reunion Island, Trinidad and Tobago, Fiji, South Africa, and we also have Girmit scholars from India, Australia, New Zealand, Europe, and the USA. We also have engagement from Solomon Islands on another aspect of historical bonded labor that was akin to slavery and which occurred in the South Pacific. This was known as blackbirding. In addition to historical aspects of labor practices, we also have speakers addressing the present-day concerns around what we have termed the new indenture labor practices. Now, the topic of our conference is, of course, not only of significance to us as scholars, but is also important to the future generations and is part of the educational heritage of our children. On this note, it gives me great pleasure to welcome our chief guest, the Honorable Premila Kumar, Minister for Education, Heritage and Arts in the government of Fiji. Minister Kumar has also held other portfolios in the government. She has been the Minister for Industry, Trade and Tourism, Minister for Local Government, Minister for Housing and Community Development. Minister Kumar is driven to empower and protect ordinary Fijians. She has received many awards, including being named the Executive Woman of the Year in 2015 by Women in Business, and she has been named by the Fiji Times as the most influential woman of the year in 2010. I will now invite Minister Kumar to give her opening address. Minister Kumar.
Master of Ceremony, scholars and researchers, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. I'm honored to speak at this third international conference on Indian indenture being held in Fiji. This conference provides an excellent forum for discussing pertinent issues around the effects of labor exploitation and indentureship on the lives and livelihoods of millions of people who are affected by these. How the social, cultural, economic, and political fabric of the South Pacific and all the Girmit countries have been shaped through the past migration and settlements, amongst other things, remain an area of significant importance to nearly 15 million people around the globe. When the Indian indentured labor system was established by the British during the 19th century, it was to create a new way of acquiring labor from its colonies after the abolition of slavery in 1834. This saw the beginning of new ecosystems developing in countries that received indentured laborers. For those of us who are descendants of indentured laborers, our history serves to inform us of the trials and tribulations of our ancestors. The dislocation from our homeland and adapting to new environment was a painful process for our ancestors. Ladies and gentlemen, the rich and painful history of Indian indentureship right across the world must be preserved and shared. Research in indenture grew across the Girmit countries over the past 4 to 5 decades. While a number of publications exist that delve on various aspects of indentureship, there remains vast gaps in knowledge that need to be filled. For this reason, academic research, credible data and accounts are absolutely necessary. Discussions on this topic must be supported by quality research to gain credibility. There is another aspect of international labor movement which has remained largely unexplored. That is the Pacific labor schemes, all the way back to the 1880s, when people were moved from countries like Vanuatu and Solomon Islands to Fiji, Australia, and beyond for work. Known as blackbirding, this remains a painful era of our past. I'm glad that the organizers have included blackbirding in this conference, and indeed also in the 2019 conference held here in Fiji. We are aware that newer forms of organized human movement have continued over the past century. More recently, the kafala system and its successor systems have been responsible for moving an estimated 20 million people, mainly from countries like India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, Philippines, Indonesia, to other countries. In the Pacific, seasonal worker schemes have been created to address shortage of labor in Australia, New Zealand, and elsewhere. All movement of people have a range of impacts on them, their families, and the hosts, not to speak of the governments of the sending and receiving nations. These needs to be studied thoroughly and benefits highlighted and shortcomings strengthened. The rise of information superhighway has created enormous opportunities for the humankind, but it has also created a huge prospect for the spread of propaganda, opinions, and falsehoods on history and our lives, which are and will be destructive. Those writing about Indian indenture, lives and societies formed by the creation of Indian indentureship, blackbirding, and new variants of this must refrain from peddling opinions and assertions. There is no place in academia and action-oriented programs for prevarications. Over the next 3 days at this conference, I understand a record 92 research presentations will be shared by researchers from Fiji, Solomon Islands, Australia, New Zealand, Caribbean nations, Mauritius, Reunion Islands, South Africa, Europe, USA, and India. I see this as a very powerful forum with so many scholars from around the world gathering to talk about indentureship, slavery, labor exploitation, and how they have shaped the lives of the diaspora and, of course, molded the countries that they went to. Conferences such as these are important because it provides different arguments based on research and facts. I encourage you all to scrutinize the presentations openly and freely, because this is how knowledge can be gained and advanced. On such critical topics, there is no room for emotions or impressions or even political point scoring. I therefore urge you all, learned people, to have lively and scholarly debates and discussions. I'm told that the presentations were made accessible by the presenters in advance so that you all could study these in order to spend more time at the conference to discuss and debate. This is an excellent idea to allow for exchange of views. I also see in the program an event to mark the launch of a new journal called Indenture Papers. This journal should become one of the major avenues of publishing papers on indenture. I believe that this is a first of its kind academic initiative to mainstream Indian indenture in the academia. Of significance also in this regard is that the journal is the first major concrete project of cross-country collaboration on studies relating to indenture. 5 major institutions from Fiji, the Caribbean, and India have commenced this collaborative project. I'm advised that 3 other countries may join the project within the coming year. Credible publication outlet is a fundamental requirement if history is to be documented and preserved for the future. Ladies and gentlemen, something that I noticed, at least for us here in Fiji, the stories of our indenture history is no longer passed down to our children. We are all to be blamed for this. I see this as a slow demise of our history. We need to bring this back. I will be working towards ensuring that our current and future generations do not miss out on this piece of history. In this regard, another collaborative project, the Indentured Labor Route Project, is an excellent example of trying to preserve the history of indentureship. This project, which has been initiated by Mauritius government, is now a UNESCO recognized project. Since the first International Scientific Committee on the Indentured Labor Route meeting in 2017 and the International Conference on Forced Labor and Migration, Indentured and Pacific Labor Trades held in Fiji in 2019, much progress has been made by each member state to advance the implementation of the Indentured Labor Route Project. One of the main aims of the Indentured Labor Route Project is to bring about better understanding among people and societies across the indentured diaspora, as well as within the countries themselves. This project is making a great effort to bring people of indentured labor descents together to create a database on Indian indenture. The international database will allow worldwide access to digital copies of archival documents, scholarly articles, photographs, and links to heritage sites. During his keynote address at the inauguration of the International Conference on Indentured Labor Route Project in Port Louis, the Mauritian External Affairs Minister said, and I quote, "The story of the indentured labor route deserves to be studied, told, and heard in a more complete, systematic, and scientific manner. This project would provide a platform and act as a catalyst to bring together researchers and scholars from around the world for conducting research and documentation on hitherto unknown aspects of indenture experience," unquote. Ladies and gentlemen, the database aims to consolidate information on the indenture labor system in each country. This database will also give the indentured diaspora an opportunity to share the experiences of the ancestors and the history with other indentured diaspora and the world at large. This is the first global effort in preserving the history of indentureship, and I commend the government of Mauritius for this initiative. I think governments play an important part in preserving the history of indentureship. In Fiji, work has already commenced by the Global Gurmit Institute on creating a searchable electronic database for all Indian indentured workers who were brought to Fiji. I noticed that the conference program document that there will be a presentation on the progress on this during this conference. Such initiatives by the non-government sector are commendable. There are other vastly important matters which need the scrutiny of the non-state sectors. One of them concerns the matter of recognition of the new societies formed by the labor movements after the end of slavery. The recognition of the Indentured Labor Route Project by UNESCO is one positive development, but there remains many other matters which can be examined by academics and researchers. Conferences of this nature are vital for not only providing an avenue for researchers to present their works, but also in encouraging further research by younger generations. I'm therefore most pleased that we are having this conference and we are having this conversation, and more pleased to see there is continuity and sustainability in conferences on Indian indenture, this being the third of its kind in Fiji. Ladies and gentlemen, I have much pleasure in declaring this conference open. I look forward to reading the proceedings of the conference, and I wish you well in your deliberations. Vinaka, Dhanyavad, Shukriya, and thank you very much.
Shukriya and Vinaka Vakalebu, Minister. It now gives me great pleasure to introduce our keynote speaker, Suannen Satyanand. Sir Satyanand is a former lawyer, judge, and ombudsman who served as New Zealand's 19th Governor General from 2006 until 2011. He also chaired the Commonwealth Foundation, which is the people's organization counterpart of the Commonwealth Secretariat, for 4 years. and he has a continuing role on the International Advisory Committee of Transparency International. Currently, Sir Satyanand is Chancellor of the University of Waikato in New Zealand and President of the New Zealand Institute of International Affairs. Sir Satyanand also has great pride in his Gurmit heritage and is very aware of safeguarding Gurmit as the cornerstone in the collective memory of not only the indentured descendants, but also the collective memory of the nation. And it gives me great pleasure to announce that Sir Satyanand has agreed to become patron of the Global Gurmit Institute's Museum project. I will now invite Sir Satyanand to give his keynote address. Sir Satyanand.
Namaste, Namaskaram, Salaam Alaikum, Nisambula Vinaka, to which I add the New Zealand greeting in Māori, Kia ora koutou. Master of Ceremonies, Dr. Farzana Gounder, Honourable Premila Minister, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you, Farzana, for the welcome, and thank you all for the privilege accorded me to be the first speaker and provider of the keynote address for this important occasion. I offer congratulations to those on the organising committee whose efforts over a considerable period of time have resulted in the agenda for what are termed the new and old indentures. In the next minutes, I have the challenge of developing an argument which underlies your endeavours in support of the Global Gurmit Institute, and my own contribution is bylined history, identity, and museums for reasons which are connected with my new patronage. The first thought I offer is that our conference occurs in the month of October, and at the end of the first week after the birth date of Mohandas Karamchand Gandhi in Porbandar on the coast of Gujarat in India on the 2nd October 1869. This man, who earns the respect of us all in 80 years of an eventful life, was to be responsible for bringing to an end 300 years of colonial rule over 300 million people in that country. He was to earn the name of the Mahatma and to become a symbol of equality of people, whatever their background, and of non-violent, non-cooperation with iniquitous and unfair government. In many parts of the world, including in Wellington in New Zealand, his birth date has been celebrated during this past week. There is a linkage between Gandhiji with Gurmit and Gurmitia, because in the course of gathering momentum for his efforts in India, after having returned from South Africa to do so, Gandhi learned of the plight of thousands of Indian people working in hugely difficult circumstances in colonies such as Fiji. To make inquiries and to offer assistance and advice, two vital people were dispatched: an Anglican religious minister, the Reverend Charles Freer Andrews, and a barrister, Manilal Maganlal Doctor, who travelled to Fiji with a purpose. Their efforts, those two people, in championing the Gurmitia, brought understanding and spirit, and played no small part in the decisions taken to cease the indentured labour system by 1920. That system had brought more than 60,000 people halfway around the globe from India to Fiji to work in the sugar industry in conditions that have attracted almost universal condemnation. Secondly, I should then state my own individual place to stand and deliver this opening address. My own background is but one of the streams involved in the conference. I am the grandson and great-grandson of 4 Girmitia who made the migration journey from India to Fiji, 2 in the early 1880s and 2 in the early 1900s. My maternal forebears, Chalakdas and Tilakdas, were recruited from Shahjahanpur in Uttar Pradesh and went to Fiji from Kolkata aboard the vessel Berar in 1882. They worked out their indenture in the sugar fields and chose eventually to remain thereafter in Fiji, taking up business and residing in Suva. My mother Tara was the youngest child of Tilak, as the family name became, and his wife Sumintra. My paternal grandparents, Mutyala Sriraman and his wife Kantama, came from Rajamundry in today's Andhra Pradesh and went to Fiji from Madras aboard the vessel Ganges, arriving in Fiji in October 1911. My grandfather was a young man who spoke Telugu and knew Tamil, Malayalam, and English. He saw the opportunity on arrival to use the Girmitia scheme to seek employment with the colonial government as an interpreter in the civil service for people before the courts. To do this, he needed to add the Fiji Bhat, the amalgam of Hindi, Bhojpuri, and other languages that the Fiji Girmitia community devised for itself. My grandfather spent a whole working lifetime in that role. My father, Mutyala Satyanand, was their only son, and in time he went to New Zealand for study, eventually qualifying as a doctor, marrying my Fiji-born mother, Tara, and staying in New Zealand. My father and mother, having married in New Zealand, had 2 sons, of whom I am the elder. I've been fortunate to enjoy the benefits of a New Zealand education and subsequent professional life as a lawyer, judge, and ombudsman. Our family has always been proud to acknowledge its Girmitia background, and we have maintained links to the present day with our cousins in Fiji or in other places to which subsequent migration has taken place, such as Australia, Canada, and the United States. It is a matter of regret that we are also another family with whom precise linkages with our own kin in India has been lost, despite efforts being made over the years to achieve a connection. I am personally fortunate to have been able to make many visits to India, as a result of which I have made and maintain a number of professional and personal contacts and friendships. The Gurmit was something that applied in a number of countries. For nearly a century, people from India traveled by ship, as we have heard already, to Mauritius, South Africa, Malaysia, Fiji, and the Caribbean, essentially to work in the sugar industry in those places, harvesting, cutting, and processing sugarcane for eventual shipment, mainly to England and more latterly to other European destinations. The term Gurmit is a matter of controversy. When he wrote about his experiences in South Africa between 1893 and 1915, Mahatma Gandhi made a passing reference to the term in the context of Natal-based labourers in South Africa, saying, "The indentured labourers were those who went to Natal on an agreement for 5 years and came to be known there as Girmitias, from Gurmit, which was the corrupt form of the English word agreement." I should add that many contemporary writers who happily have made their reputations in our time, and I instance Professor Bridgelal, Hugh Tinker, Satyendranan, Jeff Siegel, Asha Chand, Kenneth Gillen, Rajendra Prasad, Professor Vijay Naidu, Mayab Long, and Sudesh Mishra have disputed the nature of the so-called, quote, agreement, quote, aspect in the term Girmitya. I want to pause for a moment to reflect on the struggle and difficulties undergone by the Girmitya so far as their recruitment was concerned within India and so far as their conditions of work were concerned in so many places, including Fiji. Their resistance and resilience and faith in education and advancement have produced all of those of us who are able and willing to acknowledge their past. I would like to think that those Girmitya would be proud of what has been achieved by the subsequent generations in terms of education, advancement, and participation in the governance of the countries in which they themselves were so downtrodden. I today have relations who are Fijians of Indian ancestry, who are Samoans, who are citizens of the United States, Australia, New Zealand, and Canada. All of them retain the linkage of which I speak. My wife and I have encouraged our children to be proud of all their background, including the Indian and Indo-Fijian. As with all cultural linkage, such can take the form of interest in and use of language, music, dance, or food. It can even involve the pursuit of travel to access and enjoy matters of cultural heritage and religion. The extent to which precise items are retained, for example, the ability to listen to and speak in one or more of the 16 languages of India, will vary. The important thing is to find opportunities to discuss how the strands of linkage can be furthered. The way in which people might undertake their contemporary lives or approaches to their Indian heritage may be very different. This has been put in many ways, but none better, perhaps, than by the well-known Caribbean politician and later international statesman and descendant of Girmitya, Sir Sridath Sani Ramphal, erstwhile Secretary General of the Commonwealth, who described Indian cultural heritage in his own instance as being like a seed from a tree growing in India, being taken across the seas and growing with encouragement from a seed again to flower in the Caribbean, being different, but maintaining the essence of Indian origin. The Gurmat legacy can be described in both positive and negative terms. Those long years of servitude and discrimination, which have been graphically written about, what one might term be a natural consequence of shame and humiliation, along with a wish to forget and diminish and even suppress all that pertain to it. Another trend has, however, emerged in more recent years, for the time to be regarded as one exhibiting endurance, bravery, and most importantly, resilience and optimism that has led to better times. We today in 2021 march on that last mentioned pathway and have a number of ways in view as to how the Gurmat legacy might be recognised and even celebrated. To my mind, the important thing is to bring to mind is the recognition that this can take several forms, and this can be expressed in appreciation of cuisine or music and literature and dance, along with language and preservation of artifacts, no one of which necessarily has precedence over the others. I've reached a waypoint in my address of having, albeit briefly, canvassed history and identity. I now turn to examine a key area of museums, or more strictly speaking, a museum, or different kinds of museum. To start with a definition, a museum is an institution that cares for a collection of artifacts of artistic, cultural, historic, or scientific importance. I've been interested to be briefed on the process that has been undertaken by all of you connected with the Global Gurmat Institute to reach where things are this morning. The process of translating an idea and literally opening the door is challenging and can be a foreboding process. I've had the advantage in recent months to have been associated with the development of a new museum in New Zealand, and I want to draw on my observations of what needed to be done to bring it into being. The first step of 6 is to articulate the idea that expresses and answers a need. It has been put to me that the intent of the Global Gurmat Institute has been to record and make available the stories of indentured Indian migrants to Fiji who have made an impact on life that is relevant to their descendants and the general public as well. The second step of 6 is gathering the information necessary to sustain the idea and to decide whether what is proposed will harbour objects or ideas or both. Here there is a history of 100 years plus to draw down upon. That gathering process has the advantage of the technological era in which we live, enabling film and sound to join writing and actual exhibits in what will eventually constitute the stockholding of that which is contained in the museum. The structure of the organisation has to be decided upon for it to be a museum, but more than that, being something rather than being a static collection based in one place, might be something accessible in an online form, more than one setting or country, thus permitting vitality and easily enabling change and update when that is called for. This point will bear considerable attention, given that in the 21st century, there are more Fiji Indians living in countries other than Fiji itself. The third step of 6 is to build a network of support. There is a start already available with the GGI and the group contributing to this conference, amounting to about 100 people. It seems to me that a vital central group may need to be appointed to gather the financial as well as moral and emotional support to bring the idea to fruition. All those 3 elements, financial, moral, and emotional, are necessary because a museum like this will be making a statement by reason of its very being. Alongside this, there may need to be a panel of advisors, including historians, prominent museum experts, and a number of publicly known and respected people. The combined momentum provided by this group will be considerable and will be to ensure viability. The fourth step of 6 will be a decision on the structure which will demonstrate compliance with relevant law and will set a direction towards the organisation being non-profit or being a social enterprise. It may be that a trust is the most viable vehicle, or possibly an incorporated society. The answer will need complex legal advice to make sure that what works in Fiji will also work in overseas settings and the other way around. The fifth step of 6 will be location. There will be an argument in favour of saying that has already been decided by what is presently operational in Fiji. That may be so, and the decision will be that of those in charge. I want to raise the possibility of the museum being an online museum and being placed on a new platform with a new image, widely ranging and regularly changing its content, and with a modern approach to digital media. An important feature of the facility being online is one that ensures wide accessibility and a sustainable future, and with a precise home being a secondary consideration. The sixth and final step will be that of prototyping to see if the idea will work. It is fortunate that in today's world, there are a number of relevant museums which can be examined and their experiences analysed and copied where desirable. My own experience is limited to 3, all of which are from New Zealand. There will clearly be other examples. In New Zealand, we have the National Museum, Te Papa Tongarewa, which is modern, having started its life in 1998. We also have Te Ara, New Zealand's online history. The third is Jewish Lives NZ, a virtual museum entirely online that began in 2021. And it is with the last of those, the Jewish Museum, that I've had a modest association. I've thus reached another waypoint of having described 6 stages which may bear consideration in developing what lies ahead. Describe the idea, gather the information, build a network of support, decide what legal structure will be preferable, determine location, and prototype to make sure it will work. Having described what needs to be done, in my estimation, to advance the project, there is a further aspect to which I should turn before closing, and that is to describe the leadership that may be required to drive the debate about the changes that I suggest may now be needed. And to effect it, I have looked for suitable precedents and recent occurrences, and believe that I have found one sufficiently cogent to place in front of your audience. There is the frontal problem that some, perhaps many, in the audience of those being addressed will be of the view that no case for change ought to be considered. I've observed similar challenges being experienced by a number of African civil society organisations who were wishing to make submissions to the UN about the content of the proposed Sustainable Development Goals in 2016. They faced opposition from governments as well as from other rival civil society groups. What happened was that this group of civil society people decided that they had to sit down and work out a strategy that would make things happen and achieve change if that was warranted, after having made the case in as satisfactory a manner as possible. Some external help was called for in galvanizing their efforts, and that is the matter in which I played a small part in getting together in my role with the Commonwealth Foundation. The Foundation, in its role as a neutral catalyst and engager of civil society initiative, was able to help. And I think that some things that the group came to express are relevant for the purposes of the GGI. The strategy which was devised combined use of 4 words, 4 verbs: split, speak, stay, and negotiate. Split is or was to seek alternatives to the practice of simply making submissions to one group, say at a single prescribed meeting. It involved analysing a number of places where changes needed to be made and to make those submissions simultaneously in all of those places. If this is accepted, the matter of focusing the Global Gurmat Institute would be presented in a number of settings: Nandi and Lautoka first, but also Auckland and Sydney, Canberra and Wellington and Suva, plus San Francisco and Vancouver, and Port of Spain and Port Louis. When matters called for seeking expert help or finance or technical capability, the same approach would be useful. Speak, the second word, is something that the GGI has already done well in its meetings and general work in the community. In order to achieve change, it will be necessary to transform the people to whom the Institute speaks. There could be merit in speaking with precise people or organisations that will make decisions as a result, rather than simply filing away what had been transacted. The speaking should be allied with a process for change, and then the speaking should be directed at those who can be described as the change agents. Stay is a word that signifies that change may well take time to achieve, and that patience will be called for in progressing through many meetings, many sessions, many documents, and many shifts in position. Staying power means a shift away from just being involved at events and becoming focused rather on development of an idea. It means staying in relationship with people whose views might diverge from yours in service of a greater purpose, to build consensus and to build shared understanding. Observing the division in societies where leadership cleaves to one extreme or another, this priority on staying in the conversation, even when things are very difficult, cannot be understated. Negotiate also involves acceptance of a different approach. It is a case about finding friends and securing their cooperation. A shift of mindset is called for to connect with those who might be opposed to change. It is those who oppose who hold the power to success. It is a case of reflecting on Sun Tzu's Art of War, which declares, keep your friends close, but keep your enemies closer. It is just as well that many, if not most, Gurmitiya descendants are friends. The challenge is to express what change is being sought and to negotiate in favour of that and to keep negotiating. This all, ladies and gentlemen, enables me to conclude by saying that I have made a case for a new approach to be considered by the Global Gurmat Institute, which could be more relevant and fit for purpose than what has been achieved to the present. I have also offered some ways in which change might be considered and some pathways that might be used. I realise that a considerable challenge is laid down by what I've said, and I wish those who are minded to take it up all the best in their endeavours. To sum up, I am at a point where I can describe the journey undertaken by my opening address. I began linking the Gurmat with Gandhiji. I have then stated my own personal background, notwithstanding the difficulty there is about speaking of oneself in public. If I was to state my own, the reason was to state my own modest place in the Gurmat tapestry, enabling me to speak personally. I then spoke about the Gurmat struggle, foreshadowing other contributions, and more importantly, its legacy today. I identified 6 possible steps which might be helpful in developing a museum, and then ended with some reflections about how the case might be made to the community, to the government or governments, and otherwise. It is now time for me to conclude and for me to repeat how much I appreciate having been asked to join you at the beginning of a significant journey. Much of what I have said is about the future ground the museum project may stand on. I have not overlooked that you all have the next immediate days of this conference to share ideas and insights. I wish you all the best in that. I began with part of my greeting being in the Māori language, and will end in the same way, offering a proverb that is a challenge to you all. The proverb goes, "Whiria te tangata," which translated says, "Weave the people together." Dhanbad, good morning.
Thank you very much, Sir Satyanand. Can I now call upon Mrs. Reena Kumar from the Fiji National University to thank the chief guest and the keynote speaker. Reena.
Thank you, MC. Thank you, MC. The respected guest, chief guest, Honorable Premila Kumar, Minister of Education, Heritage and Arts, Government of Fiji. The keynote speaker, Sir Suannen Satyanand, distinguished guests, participants, ladies and gentlemen from all over the world. It has been our pleasure to virtually host this conference. It has indeed been many months of preparation. The main purpose of this international conference is to exchange knowledge, views, and experiences of scholars around the world on the lives and history of Gurmitias. This has been a long journey for us in different parts of the world, and this journey will continue. Our heartfelt thanks to the Honorable Minister of Education, Mrs. Kumar, for being with us this morning. We thank her for her observations and acknowledgement of the organization of the Global Gurmit Institution. We wish her well in her endeavors. To the keynote speaker, Sir Anand Satyanand, you inspired us, sir, by your highly valued observations, your experiences about the descendants, your great knowledge of the Gurmitias and their contribution to the global society. Your valued message has been very well taken. We wish you well, sir. Our thanks to all those who joined us this morning from all over the world. Thank you, Dhanibad, Shukriya, and Vinaka.
Thank you very much, Reena. Ladies and gentlemen, that brings us to the end of the formal part of the conference. We will be moving into our presentation sessions. So let me introduce our chairs for the conference. For session 1, which covers the themes of legal, business, environment, politics, economics, health, migration, new indenture, and the Pacific Labor Scheme, we have Professor Shailendra Bahadur Singh. For session 2, which covers the themes of history, legacy of indenture, and construction of identities, we have Professor Sunil Kumar. And for session 3, which covers the themes of language, literature, and creative arts, we have Professor Rajni Kaushal Chand. Just a bit of virtual conference housekeeping before we move on. Please remember to keep your mics muted at all times unless it is your turn to speak. Out of respect for our presenters, the chairs are going to be quite strict about time. As you can appreciate, given the large number of presentations that we have, people are working across time zones, we do have to be strict about time. And just a reminder that if you are presenting in any of the panels, please be present in person to answer questions. We hope that you will enjoy the conference and that the conference will provide you with a platform to create research synergies with your fellow participants. We will be moving into session 1, and I will hand over to the session chair, Professor Shailendra Singh. Thank you very much.